It was a problem of my own making. But I have a Hambini BB86 bottom bracket, and I'm putting it into a Yoeleo R11 road bike frame. When I first tried fitting the bottom bracket in, I did it, and I only wanted to push the non-drive side through the drive side opening just to see that it would do it. I used this tool that Hambini asked me to make. He calls it a go, no go. It's 41 mil on one side, 40.95 on the other side. So the 40.95 should be a go into the opening of the frame. The 41 should be a no-go. Well, I tested the opening with 40.95 side, and it went in, but it only went in maybe 3 mil. And I thought, okay, if it goes in, it goes in. The thing will push through. And that was the wrong assumption. And I sent Hambini a message saying, well, this is how far it went in. Should it actually go in more? And I didn't hear back from him for a couple of days. No harm. I mean, he's got a life, and it was the weekend and whatnot. But he always gets back, and he wrote back, no, I would whiffle it, by which he means hone out some of the material in the frame so that the go side goes in more. He said it should go in, quite a bit. Well, by that time I had already tried it, and the fact of the matter is it went in the drive side, no problem. And I didn't even push it all the way through because I had electric wires hanging out for the DI2. And I didn't have an uninstall tool. So I felt kind of committed. And it just stuck in the opening there for the duration of the build till I was ready to push it through. Meanwhile, I get his message saying, you probably need to whiffle it. I thought, well, it seems like it's going in. So just give it a try. That was the wrong move. It went in the non-drive side to within about a millimeter, and then it wouldn't budge. So I said, well, all right, that's a fuck up. I need to unfuck it. So I contacted him. He said, you're going to have to take it out. I'll send you some drawings for tools. Get it out, and another one to put it back in. So he sent me a drawing to make these tools here. That's the uninstall piece, and that's the install piece. So basically what you're doing is you're using the bottom bracket press in reverse to push it out from the non-drive side into this. These were the original tools that came with the bottom bracket, and they would perfectly well suffice, except that I kind of stupidly proceeded with pushing the bottom bracket through when I shouldn't have. This is the side that goes on the non-drive side when you're installing the BB, and this goes in to the drive side, and you take the Delrin spacer out, and you put this in so that this rests directly on the outer race of the bearing, so you're pushing on the bearing. Well, I couldn't get it through, and this thing kept slipping off the side of my bottom bracket on the frame, and it scratched some paint, and I had to fix that. Anyway, he saw what I did, and he said, okay, I'm going to send you these drawings for the new tools. And he made it a lot beefier. Like this one here is maybe about 3 or 4 millimeter width on this edge, and this one is maybe 6 or 7. So that made it easier because I had more to bite onto the frame itself, so it didn't slide. Anyway, I got this made locally. It's cheap. Cost me about 20 bucks at a machine shop. And it's according to his drawings. So I just put it on there, and the thing came right out. It was no problem at all. So that's leading up to what I'm going to post a video about, and that is rectifying the problem with the frame. Now the question arises, this is such a simple, cheap tool. Why isn't every frame maker in the world using this as part of their QC process before they ship a frame? Obviously they're not, because according to hundreds of people on the internet reporting and Hambini's investigations, the bottom bracket bore opening is the singularly most screwed up part of a frame, and it's hard to do. But it's not hard to check. You just put that in. If it goes in pretty well, cool. If it doesn't, uncool. Fix it as part of the QC before you ship it to somebody. But obviously that's not a number one priority for frame makers, but it's a simple fix. They should be doing it. Instead, it's up to us to do it. So that's the first thing he advised me to do after I bought his bottom bracket. He said, now, George, bear in mind that the tolerances that I machine my bottom brackets to are very tight, and they're going to fit a Shimano frame opening. Okay, now Shimano has specific tolerances, and this 40.95 to 41 will suffice to check it to Shimano tolerances. When done, I had to do it. I was a newbie doing it, so I didn't interpret it right. But another thing that's interesting is this thing is near perfectly round. I mean, these machine shops do a fine job of getting things to the tolerance in the drawing. So when I put it in there, I put it in the drive side, and I went around to the non-drive side, and I looked through there, and I shined a light, and I could see a couple places on the perimeter where the light was shining through. And what's that tell you? That tells you the thing is not perfectly round. And that's what Hambini told me. He says it's probably got a little bit of ovality, oval shape to it. That's why you're seeing that light. And I figure that's a pretty common problem on carbon frames. You think about how they have to engineer that, and they're cooking the fibers, and then it relaxes after it comes out of the mold. So I knew I had a little bit of a problem there, but the thing went in. I thought, okay, it'll go in. And that was wrong. So what did I do to fix it? I talked to Dr. Hambini, and he's got a video on his website where he shows what he's calling whiffling the bottom bracket opening in the frame. And a whiffle is just using a device to scrape out an infinitesimal amount of material from the carbon face of the bottom bracket. He used a flap wheel, a sanding wheel, and he put what I would call a hose clamp on it and tightened it way down so that the flap wheel fit in that 41 mil opening, and then he took the clamp off and it's spring loaded so it opened back up, and then he put it on a drill and he just backed off some of the material. It didn't take 10 seconds, and I figure that's a pretty rough approach to milling a bottom bracket, and especially for somebody that's never done it. So I thought, well, a cylinder bore hone is probably going to work better. Now these things are spring loaded. I've got a zip tie on here, so I don't know if I can demonstrate if you haven't seen a cylinder bore hone. It's spring loaded. So you stick it in the bore opening, let it go, and it'll open to the size of the opening. Obviously it's made to do different sizes. So this is size that would 20 to 60 mil. So I figured it'd be right on for the 41 millimeter opening. And then you just put it on a drill and a little oil on the stones so they don't chip. And it's a much kinder process than using a sanding flap wheel. And I asked him about it. He said, yeah, actually a cylinder bore hone is the thing to use. It does a much better job, and it's going to take you longer. He said maybe 10 minutes. It didn't take 10 minutes. It took about a minute maybe a minute and a half of total honing time using my drill, but I did it in about 4 or 5 stages on the drive side. Now it turns out the drive side, as could be deduced from my problem, was not as small an opening, undersized, as the non-drive side, because it took about a minute and a half total time. And I checked it 3 or 4 or 5 times with this thing after each period of honing. Cleaned it out, honed some more, cleaned it out, checked it, did that until this thing went in to within about just under a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters, 7 millimeters showing. I figured that's enough. What I didn't want to do was over-hone it, because if you over-hone it, you're kind of doubly fucked. So I turned the frame around and I honed the other side. Now the other side was obviously a side that was much undersized. And it took quite a bit of honing, not 10 minutes, but maybe about 2 or 3 minutes of total honing time. But again, I did that in multiple stages so I could check it. And incrementally it went in more and more and more until the go side was in once again to within about 6 or 7, 8 millimeters of the no-go side. So I figure that's good enough. Now what's the next step after that? Well, you got to clean it out. And keep in mind, I had the machine wired, so I got all that crap down in the bottom bracket area, and I'm tucking it out of the way, because the last thing you want to do is hone one of your electrical wires accidentally. That would be something I would do. So I was real careful about that. So I got to clean it out, and I did that. I just used some degreaser, cleaned it out, let it dry, took some isopropyl alcohol and got rid of any residual degreaser residue, and then I just did the Hambini instruction. He said get some activator, I think it's 7649 Loctite activator. Put that on the races. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. Put it on there, let it dry, and then you've got about, I don't know, quite a long period of time before you actually have to insert what you're going to put in there. You don't have to do it right away. You can do it and then next week fit the bottom bracket, whatever. And then the Loctite goes on as you're actually putting the bottom bracket in there. Once you've got it through the drive side and you're about to push it into the non-drive side, then you put the Loctite on the non-drive side carbon face, and you use your finger and put it on just the part of the bottom bracket that's going to press in on the drive side, because you can't get your finger into the carbon race, so you just put it on the bottom bracket itself. And I put it in, it went in without any problem. It was sweet as could be, and it was so sweet I started thinking, I wonder if I overhoned, because there was no real creaking and popping. There was when I first tried it, but not after the fix. So I was concerned about that, but I believe it's okay because I've taken it for a ride and the thing works. Anyway, so that was kind of a summary of my problem and the tools used to affect the solution. Cylinder bore hone, and then Hambini actually created this for me. The guy's amazing. I mean, he's very responsive. The problem is, furthermore, with my particular installation, when I went to put the crank in, I wanted to obviously put the axle in. Now the axle is 24 millimeter axle, but 24 millimeter doesn't mean it's 24 millimeter. What it means is it's machined to a certain tolerance. Shimano's tolerance specs are 23.97 millimeter to 24. Anywhere within that range is acceptable. Now that's Shimano. Well, I didn't have a Shimano crankset. I bought Rotor. Rotor has a 24 millimeter axle, goes in, works just fine. I went to put the axle in, and of course you got the bottom bracket in, and then there's two Delrin caps that pop in, covering up the bearing and rotate around. So you got to put that axle through the Delrin cap and then out through the other side Delrin cap, drive side, non-drive side. Well, it went through the drive side Delrin cap without a problem. It would not go into the non-drive side Delrin cap. So I switched them. I said, maybe, no, it just wouldn't go. Once again, I talked to the doctor, and again, he responds, he says, well, the way I machine the bottom bracket is fit Shimano specs, and it's right on. He says, my tolerances are very tight. So if your frame is not right, it's not going to go in properly. So that was the first problem, which I resolved. And he said, Rotor, to avoid patent infringement, machines there are 24 millimeter axle. Once again, it's 24 millimeter, right? Well, not right. What it is a 24.03 to 24.1 millimeter. So Rotor axle is actually anywhere from 0.3 to 1.3 0.13 millimeter. Yeah, 0.13 millimeter larger than Shimano. That's why it wouldn't go in there. So what's the fix? Hone the Delrin cap. Now this obviously is not going to work to hone the Delrin cap, because the inside of that Delrin cap is 24 millimeters, marginally, nominally. This wouldn't go in there. So I had to kind of do it by hand, and what I did is this with the Delrin cap. Now that's fairly imprecise bit of honing, wouldn't you think? And I'm doing it, I'm going, well, when do I stop? When is enough enough? Well, I did it. It took half an hour worth of doing this, because once again, I'm trying the axle into it so I don't over hone the cap. I got it so the cap would slide onto the axle, but it was binding on the axle, so it wouldn't really rotate properly. So I kept doing it until the undersized cap matched the feel of the one that fit on, and it works. But it took a while, and I'm down there at night in my shop honing like this. I'm going, well, this is a half-baked little process, but it worked. And apparently, well, there's, as Mr. Hambini said, it's a tolerance stack-up, George. Rotor and Shimano are slightly different, so maybe it goes in, maybe it doesn't, depending on how, close to Shimano's upper end tolerance the rotor axle is. If it's toward the upper end of the rotor tolerance specification, it's not going to go in, but if it's toward the lower end of the rotor, it might. So it did for one, it didn't for the other. I fixed it. Bottom line is the bottom bracket went in there just sweet as could be. I didn't ride the thing for a week. I had other work to do on it and a life with interruptions. So Hambini said, just use the activator and the Loctite, and I think you're good to go. Unless your go, no-go tool wasn't machined properly. If this is not giving you the proper reading, you're screwed again. Well, I think that would be the least likely scenario, and the most likely scenario is the unibiker screwed it up another way. You know, there's all kinds of ways to make a mistake, and I'll find them all eventually, probably. Anyway, famous writer Mr. Mark Twain commented about experience. You know, you're reading the instructions about how to do this on all these websites, and the feeling I got having read the instructions, and I'm not a stupid man, I read it, I understand it, I think about it, try to figure it out, and I go, these instructions were written so that somebody that's done it understands it. So I wrote Rotor, and I said, you know, your instructions for fitting the thing on the bike, the crankset, leave something to be desired, because you talk about the O-rings and the spacers, and there's a pictorial that shows O-rings and spacers, but it doesn't really look like O-rings and spacers. In any event, I had some questions. I said, what you guys ought to do is not let somebody that's done this advise the writer who's writing the copy for the instructions. Yes, that would be the first step. Write it, first draft. Give it to somebody like me that's never installed a rotor crankset. Let me read it and look at it and try and do it. Come up with 3 or 4 obvious questions that a newbie or a dumb fuck like me would ask, and then give it back to the writer to make it a little bit more clear. That would have worked. Anyway, it's like that with all of the website information. Some of it's better than others, and there's lots of reference sites out there where you can get added information, but Rotor's responsive, and it's a wonderful product, and I'm glad I bought it and I figured it out. But as Mr. Mark Twain once wrote about experience, he said, experience is what you get right after you really needed it. And if that ain't the damn truth, I don't know what is. Now I'm going to post a video showing the hone-in process and then the install process for the bottom bracket. And I've got some other stuff I want to post about the R11 build, which I will do in the upcoming few days. Anyway, thanks for listening.